The sky was veiled in a shroud of gray, and the wind whispered through the trees as if carrying the secrets of forgotten souls. The Darkwood, a forest spoken of only in hushed tones, stretched endlessly before Eryon. He was a legendary warrior, known throughout the kingdoms for his unmatched skill in combat. Yet even he felt a chill crawl up his spine as he gazed into the shadows that blanketed the forest. The tales of the Darkwood were not mere stories. They were warnings of evil, of corruption, of creatures born from nightmares. Aryon's mission was clear. He had been tasked to venture deep into the heart of the forest and hunt the malevolent shadows that had begun to emerge, plaguing nearby villages and devouring the souls of the innocent. These shadows were not creatures of flesh and bone, but manifestations of darkness itself, feeding off fear, despair, and hatred. To face them was to face one's own inner demons. As Eryon entered the forest, the light from the fading sun was quickly swallowed by the trees, and soon he was engulfed in darkness. The canopy above was so thick that not even a sliver of moonlight could penetrate it. His hand instinctively tightened around the hilt of his sword, a weapon forged in the fires of a forgotten age, its blade imbued with ancient magic. His footsteps were silent, a skill honed from years of tracking prey, but the forest was unnaturally quiet. There were no animals, no birds, not even the rustle of leaves. Only the oppressive silence and the faint, almost imperceptible hum of something lurking just beyond his sight. Aryon's senses were sharp, attuned to every subtle shift in the air, every flicker of movement in the periphery. The shadows here were not mere tricks of light. They moved with purpose, slipping between the trees like wraiths, always just out of reach. Eryon knew they were watching him, studying him. They were patient, waiting for the moment when fear would take root in his heart. But Eryon was no ordinary warrior. He had faced terrors beyond the comprehension of most men, and fear, though present, did not control him. He ventured deeper, the forest seeming to fold in on itself as if trying to swallow him whole. Hours passed, or perhaps it was days. It was impossible to tell in a place where time seemed to lose all meaning. And then, without warning, they came. A shadow, formless and shifting, darted from the trees, its inky tendrils reaching for him. Eryon's sword was out in an instant, the blade gleaming with a cold, ethereal light. He slashed at the creature, but his sword passed through it as if cutting through smoke. The shadow recoiled, but did not disappear. Instead, it seemed to multiply, splitting into two, then four, then more, until the forest was alive with writhing shapes, each one a flicker of darkness, a whisper of malevolence. Aryon's mind raced. These were no ordinary enemies. Physical attacks would do little good against such ethereal foes. He needed to rely on more than just his strength. He needed to remember the ancient teachings passed down to him by the mystics of his homeland. With a deep breath, he closed his eyes and muttered an incantation, his voice low and steady. The shadows paused, as if sensing the shift in energy. Eryon could feel the magic coursing through his veins, a primal force that resonated with the forest itself. He opened his eyes, now glowing faintly with an otherworldly light, and raised his sword once more. This time, the blade did not merely cut through the shadows, it dispelled them, forcing them to retreat into the depths of the trees. For the first time, the forest responded. The ground trembled beneath his feet, and a low, guttural growl echoed from the darkness. The shadows were not the true enemy. They were merely the servants of something far older, something that had been lurking in the Darkwood for centuries, waiting for the right moment to rise. Eryon pressed forward, his determination unshaken. The air grew colder, and the oppressive weight of the forest seemed to bear down on him, but he did not falter. He knew what he had come to face. The Shadowlord, a being of pure darkness, said to be as old as the forest itself. It had no true form, only the endless void of despair and death. To defeat, it would require more than magic, more than strength. It would require the will to confront the deepest, darkest corners of his own soul. At last, Eryon reached the heart of the forest. The trees here were ancient, their bark twisted and blackened, as if they had been burned by some unholy fire. In the center of the clearing stood a massive stone altar, carved with runes that glowed faintly in the darkness. The air was thick with malevolent energy, and from the shadows that clung to the trees, the Shadowlord emerged. It was not a creature of flesh, but a swirling mass of darkness, its form constantly shifting and changing. Red eyes like embers in the night burned from within the void, and a voice, deep and echoing, filled Eryon's mind. You are brave, warrior, but you are also foolish. You cannot defeat what you cannot comprehend. Eryon stood his ground, his sword ready. The Shadow Lord circled him, the air growing colder with every passing second. You cannot fight the darkness with light alone, it hissed. You must embrace it, become one with it. Eryon said nothing. He knew the Shadow Lord was trying to break his will, to make him doubt. But he had prepared for this moment. He had not come to banish the darkness, but to understand it, to face it, and in doing so, to conquer it. With a deep breath, Eryon lowered his sword and closed his eyes. He let the darkness wash over him, felt its cold, suffocating grip. The voice of the Shadow Lord grew louder, more insistent, but Eryon did not waver. He embraced the shadows, not as an enemy, but as a part of himself. The fear, the doubt, the despair, they were all within him, but they did not define him. In that moment, something changed. The darkness that surrounded him began to shift, no longer hostile but calm, as if it had been waiting for him to accept it. Eryon opened his eyes, and the Shadow Lord recoiled, its form flickering and unstable. You cannot. The voice stammered, but it was too late. Eryon raised his sword, now glowing with a brilliant light, and struck. The blade pierced the Shadow Lord's core, and with a final, deafening roar, the creature dissolved into nothingness. The darkness lifted, and the forest, once oppressive and terrifying, was now bathed in a soft, silver light. Eryon stood alone in the clearing, his sword at his side. The battle was over, but the journey had only just begun. He had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, not by destroying it, but by understanding it. And in that understanding, he had found peace.